Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Seal-Okanagan First Nation, where I gratefully live rurally, intergenerationally, and as animistically and collapse-aware as I can, just a short drive away from a small town known as Summerland, BC. And today, I'm the guest. I'm the everyday folk. This is a solo episode. And heads up, I'm about to be a little bit sad. I'm going to be sad for a little bit here. So if you find it cringy and like annoying to watch people cry on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, maybe this episode isn't for you. Maybe it's too cringe. I'm beyond cringe. I live out beyond the fields of, right? Anyway, I live out beyond cringe. So yeah, I'm not going to make excuses for like crying and stuff sometime. It's just where I'm at, folks. But more seriously, content warning for this one, okay? I'm going to be talking about mental health challenges that include serious themes like suicidality, paranoia, psychosis, and things like that. So if you're not in the mood, just skip this one. Especially if you personally struggle with these issues, then you probably don't need to hear a caregiver whining about how hard it is, right? So I would suggest you just give this one a pass. There's like over 250 other episodes you could listen to and literally millions of other podcasts that you could listen to. So I don't have bandwidth for critical feedback about it right now. I'll talk more about that later, but you know, you can always press stop if you feel like it's too much or you just don't like my take, you know? But if you are someone who's been, if you're the caregiver or perhaps intimate partner or close family member to someone who struggles quite seriously with mental health or a debilitating physical illness, then welcome to my cry party. Or also if you're someone who has been going through grief or bereavement lately, I'm with you. We are people living in the land of the sad right now. Now, I know it's been awfully quiet around here since like the first week of January. I put out that one episode with Sophie last month, and I said, I've been going through it, and I'll tell you about it later. But, as regular listeners already know, my relocation was quite recent. I moved to the country. I moved to my in-laws' land with my husband recently. The last U-Haul truck was mid-February, but we're still very much in recovery mode. Plus, we got rent-evicted from our former home that we've been to for over 10 years where we were doing urban homesteading. So that sucked, right? We didn't want to leave there. I had looked for almost 2 years for another place to live on the island where my family is 3 generations deep, and we just couldn't afford it. So can't afford I couldn't afford to rent a place in like the shitty part of town I grew up in. So, and it's not for lack of earning. It's because this is one of the most expensive places to live in North America and in the world. Anyway, I'll get into that later. But to be honest, I've just been feeling so uprooted and displaced and untethered these past weeks, or let's say months. And it's not that it's not welcoming here. It really is. Like the land and the people have been very kind. There are wild horses that are in this area, and I visited with them and they let me pet them. I hear apparently that's a little bit rare, so I do feel kind of special. I've been able to give them some good scratches. If you've been on my Instagram, you've seen I even was able to groom one of them. So it's like I can feel the land itself is trying to console me. It's just that I'm so existentially lonely here in this place that is not my place, or this place that is not quite my home yet. place that has like none of my usual places of solace, very few of my power plants. Like I have to find everything new, you know? So like where do I go when I'm, grieving a sudden and shocking loss? Like which are the trees and the rocks that hold me best? Where do I go when I'm angry? Which spots are okay with me pouring out my rage? Where do I walk when I'm seeking refuge and peace and I want to be comforted by spirit, Like just finding everything new is just so hard when you're going through it. And I just, I miss everything and everyone, human and non-human, that used to hold me and give me comfort. And then in March, my dearest matriarch, one of my favorite aunties, can't really say who's my favorite because there's still one living, but one of my favorites, my Auntie Debbie, she died very suddenly, very unexpectedly. My Auntie Debbie was like 18 years old when I was born, and my mom had like just turned 20. And my mom was like, pretty quickly back in school to become a dental assistant because she was like a single mom, basically a teen mom who needed a career to support me. So it was the rest of the household that was really with me during the daytimes. And so this household was like, when I was little, what I was born into was this like tiny house in Cowichan Bay, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom upstairs, and like a cool basement downstairs, meaning like temperature wise, it was very cool. It was just like, a concrete cellar. It wasn't like a fancy, awesome, anyway. There was a waterbed though. In the 80s, we did get a waterbed because the basement was so cool. And if you don't know about waterbeds, you can like set the temperature. So that's how we could like sleep in the basement without like freezing our butts off. Is there was a waterbed. Anyway, my grandma had a beauty salon. She converted the garage. And anyway, so there was like my mom brought me home. She was the oldest of 4 girls. And then my grandma Isabel and my great grandma, who we all called Granny. If you asked any of those people who are still alive, like who was my primary caregiver when Bonnie, my mom, was in school, they would all say, oh, we all were. Everybody raised you. And like maybe that was true in summer times. And it is really easy for me to remember like very long, carefree summer days, which like must have been, it was just like feral children because my aunties would have been like still in their late teens. And I just remember them trying to keep me occupied by being like, Carmen, show us how fast you can run. And I'd be like, okay. And I would run all over the yard. And they'd be like, oh, I forgot to set the stopwatch. Go again. Anyway. But, my grandma, Isabel, she was working like really long days in her beauty salon to support everyone, right? And Granny she was already pretty unwell by the time I came along. She eventually died of emphysema when I was like 7. And my younger aunties, Auntie Karen, she was still in high school. Auntie Sandy was in like elementary school, maybe even. So that just left my Auntie Debbie. So my mom went to school during the day, and my Auntie Debbie took care of me. And then Debbie would go to work as a short order cook in the evenings when all the other women were available to watch me. So like, yes, it's true. They all took care of me, but like the waking hours, that was Debbie. So I just always felt like Debbie was more like a mom than an auntie. My other aunties are closer to me in age, so they always thought of me more like a sister. But anyway, so since Debbie passed and became an ancestor, I've just been feeling like an orphan. Like I've been severed from my taproot, and then like plucked up and tossed onto some pile of rocks in some place in the like subalpine desert of the Okanagan. It's not even recognizable to me. So it's extra hard for me to hold on to my center. And one might notice, especially if one were Reuben, that I'm more short-tempered. I have like grief brain where I'm forgetting details. I don't have as much emotional bandwidth as I could really use for my work life or my home life. And, if you've been listening for a while now to this podcast, you would know that I've been estranged from my mom for, well, it'll be going on. Oh God, I'm so bad at this kind of math. 16 years now. Wow, actually, as of yesterday, I know the exact date. As of yesterday, it's been 16 years since I've seen my mother. And, it still comes up sometimes in therapy. That's the kind of wound that never fully goes away, but I feel really solid in that stance. Like I have a lot of love and compassion for my mom in many ways, but um, I I don't, well, I would quote Prentice Hemphill, right? Like boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and myself in equal measure. So this is the right distance. But lately, I've had this very primal, like, I want my mom feeling, not my specific mother per se, but just the feeling of being mothered, just the craving for someone who's bigger and steadfast and trustworthy and protective of me in like an unconditional and maternal way. It's just this like deep, achy yearning in me right now. When I was sharing some of this with my therapist, she said, like, and so did Debbie, and maybe your aunties, did they make you feel that way? And it was like, oh, yeah, definitely. Like, I never doubted the love they had for me. They truly had the beam gleam in their eyes. And even if we hadn't talked for a while, or when there were, I would say tensions, because of course they had great loyalty to my mom, their oldest sister. And my mom, is kind of a difficult personality. So even when they sided, or it seemed to me they kind of sided with her or were too afraid of her to side with me and like make me feel more invited, I still always 100% knew they loved me and missed me. And my therapist said, "Oh, because you exist in their hearts and minds constantly." And that was like, yes, that is unequivocally true. I exist in their hearts and minds constantly, and I know that. One funny little aside, my Uncle Mo, so my Auntie Debbie's husband, we were talking after her death, and I was checking in on him, and he said this one thing that just cracked me up and was so validating. He was like, "Well, the one silver lining is that I'll never have to talk to your mom again, that lunatic." And for some reason, lunatic is just such a sick burn. It just cracked me up because, yeah, that's like just a great way of describing her. Anyway, so I'm all over the place, but so I guess, like, okay, my point is, I guess I'd say that lately there is an acutely regressed part of me that feels about 8 years old. And this part of me feels like they've been just dropped off on this land in the middle of the of nowhere, and like she can't get her bearings. It sort of reminds me of like the feeling if you ever had like your parents miscommunicate or just for whatever reason forget to pick you up after school. If you ever had that, and like you're there kind of like playing by yourself on the playground until it gets pretty dark and no one's there, like that's how it feels um, for part of me. And then there's this like other part of me that is feeling extraordinarily adult, I guess. And I guess what I mean by that is like, wow, I am it. Like, I am responsible for all this. Now, let me just say, like, disclaimer, my husband, Ruben, totally present, totally working hard, totally attuned. Like, I am not alone. But I just do feel that for so many core critical, mission critical aspects of the well being of my loved ones, I am central. Like, I am the economic engine of my family. I am the ballast that keeps us living in a like reasonably healthy ways and, with good, eating and drinking and coming and going and like just keeping things moving, and I keep us tethered to a vision of what we're all doing here on this land, tethered to a vision and intention of living in ways that accord with secure attachment. In other words, I keep a lot of the contact nutrition flowing. Again, not all by myself. My husband Ruben is definitely my equal counterpart there in many ways and is like doing the best with his parents. Well, I kind of do the primary lion's share with my kid and, but yeah, he's showing up. But I guess what I would say is like, yeah, not when it comes to parenting. And that's just another area where I feel, yeah, um, profoundly responsible, as I should, right? But even though there's like three parents in our arrangement, there's like me, Ruben, the step parent, and then my kid's dad. I am the parent. I am the parent. I am the parent. I am bringing the parent archetype. And for folks who don't know, like I am the parent of a trans, non-binary ADHDer, so someone with both autism and an ADHD diagnosis. And also, our child comes with complex health challenges that so far elude the physical health challenges anyway. The disability eludes a very clear diagnosis, but we've narrowed it down. It's clearly something that comprises symptoms that look like a combination of maybe like ME/CFS, so myoencephalitis. I can't remember. Myo myalgic. I have to look up with MEs. This is my grief brain and my perimenopausal brain right now, but chronic fatigue syndrome is the former, more common name for it. Or like maybe fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia, my Auntie Karen has that. My grandma had that. It seems to run in my family. There's a slim chance maybe my kid actually has something more like mold toxicity, but I don't know if that theory is going to hold up so well since we've moved to this very dry area. The conditions not really changing. And then also, like, for what it's worth, I personally think it's long COVID, but, good luck getting a diagnosis and being taken seriously for that. And anyway, there's difficulty with pain flares and post-exertional malaise and extremely difficult menstrual pain and fainting and vasovagal syncope, things like that. Complex. Anyway, one of the sayings that I quote a lot is, "You're only as happy as your least happy child." So I'm doing about as well as you might expect, given everything I've just shared about myself and then about like my kid situation. And so, while moving to the country and like getting my 21-year-old set up with their own living space and like laying the groundwork for more animals to come join us here, like all of that is definitely helpful for my child's physical and emotional, psychological health. But it's not a panacea. I'd be lying if I didn't have some kind of magical thinking and some hope that there would have been quite a bit more improvement by now. Um, it hasn't been very long. But also, yeah, it's just not looking right now. Well, anyway, we'll see how it is. But what I would say is already a proven positive is it does seem like the mental health issues are more manageable here. And in moving here, I mean, essentially what I've done is by like taking our monthly expenses right down to move to this like paid off land is it just means I've like pretty effectively removed any and all pressure for my child to launch into the world of capitalism. And so that means they can be disabled in peace. They can be physically and psychologically and emotionally just like pretty unable to function under capitalist, ableist, supremacist patriarchy in peace, and because I protect them from that. And I'll share more about my longer term plan to continue to protect them from that in a moment. But lest anyone get the impression that migrating from the city to the country has solved all the problems, let me disabuse you of that notion. It has not, and I don't anticipate that it will. To be fair, though, I do stand behind my hypothesis that an autistic lifestyle was what my kid really needed to be able to survive. And what I mean by that is like a couple years ago, when we were getting like passed around the mental health care system from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, everything from, well, anyway, I wrote up this one pager that we could bring to every appointment that just like summarized the context of our healthcare, my child's healthcare journey. And this paper has two columns, and on the left side, it describes the symptom my kid had, how old they were, what year it was. And then on the right, in the right column, connected to it, it lists the practitioners and the interventions that we tried and for how long. So when I was gathering all this information for this one pager, I actually looked back through all the appointments in my Google Calendar over a period of 10 years for my child, and it averaged 2 medical appointments per month for a decade. Of course, they didn't happen in a regular way like that. Sometimes there'd be more, sometimes less, but that's what it averaged. And so it was pretty easy to see at a glance on that one pager because we had the names of like all the best psychologists and psychiatrists and neurologists in town. It was really clear just from that one pager that like the problem wasn't becoming clearer or getting better. It was actually just becoming more complex. And so that's pretty much like a couple of years ago when I started looking at other places to live, is because I realized my child actually doesn't need another psych eval or another diagnosis. My child needs like 20 acres and a couple of horses. My child needs an autistic lifestyle, meaning they have a small, consistent group of trusted people around them. They don't have like strangers or crowds or, people spontaneously dropping in and that kind of thing. There's low sensory input. There are few prediction errors, like, very little change of routine or people. There are like long time horizons to accomplish developmental tasks. Like we don't expect them to get their driving license at 16. Maybe this year at 21, they might start trying. Or there's like long time horizons also on the daily activities of living, right? So we don't get hung up on, oh, you haven't showered in 7 or 8 days. It's like it's going to happen when they have the spoons for it to happen, right? And also there needed to be like a high degree of autonomy and therefore safety so that they could like roam the land as they please and have their own home base to come back to for rest and recuperation. So like their own private dwelling where they could rest and recuperate regardless of time of day or night. So in other words, no pressure to conform to a 24-hour circadian rhythm and very few disturbances to their sleep. And their sleep is allowed to happen whenever they want for however long they need. So, so that's what I knew we needed. I maybe want to say one thing here. I don't want to discount or discredit getting a diagnosis when I say like my kid doesn't need a diagnosis. And I don't know. I guess I would just say my child has clearly stated that at times having various diagnoses has been a very useful shorthand for like new people, especially healthcare practitioners or like, getting to know their grandparents, my in-laws, that, that has been good because my in-laws have some experience as home care workers and working with neurodivergent populations. So like that has been very helpful. And has also found like some people are more willing to like make accommodations if you have a formal diagnosis, more willing than if you just said, oh, I struggle with this or that. It's also helped them to make friends because, for them, it's nice to have a quick shorthand way to get to know that someone else really gets what you need to thrive. And you both have you have an affinity for certain ways of being, and you kind of get each other's vibe and respect each other's like sensory rhythms. And they haven't said this, my kid hasn't said this, but you know, I say this to a lot of my clients and students, and I have found it to be true myself, that coherence is very grounding. So, like having a cognitive framework is very stabilizing. It's like nice for our nervous system. Understanding and awareness can settle the nervous system in like a really yummy or relieving way. So, that is all very true. That said, as my child grows older and we are eliminating some potential diagnoses, and we are inching ever closer to a much more serious diagnosis. I, as a parent, am at the place where the coherence isn't as stabilizing anymore. Like it's just pretty scary. You know, like when the head of psychiatry says, well, it's either schizophrenia or epilepsy, and then you do all the testing and they're like, you're not epileptic. Um, yeah, it's just a really scary feeling. Anyway, where my child is at now requires serious attention and treatment just beyond horses and wide open spaces, right? Because schizophrenia is a toxic environment for the brain. At least that's what like a lot of studies around neurotoxicity theory are showing. Certainly now getting into being connected with some new psychiatric professionals in this region that we've moved to. And, you know, we were on a wait list for like 2.5 years. I keep saying my child was on a wait list for 2.5 years. And we've just moved, and then they got connected anyway. So it's a little bit complicated, but they're not just abandoning my child, and that's great. And we're kind of getting fast tracked to get into local services. So that's great. But yeah, it is kind of like when the new practitioner is like, oh yeah, no, definitely this is very serious. It's like, oh shit, I'm used to healthcare. I'm used to our doctor dismissing us. I'm used to, you know, the psychologist saying, well, you're too young for me to diagnose you with that or whatever. So the pendulum has swung pretty hard in the other direction. Anyway, the term neurotoxic is used to describe like a substance or condition or state that damages the nervous system. It's not, when I think of neurotoxin, I generally think of like, oh, the brain, but it's actually really specifically, it's damaging the nervous system. That includes the central nervous system in the brain and spine, but it's the whole nervous system. So in this neurotoxicity theory of schizophrenia, they look at like neuroanatomical changes in the brain. So they look at brain scans to see physical changes and if and how they correlate to neurobehavioral and clinical measures. So like the way people think and act. And they try to see whether there are physical changes in the brain or changes in the efficiency of the function of the brain correlated to changes in ability or mood or capacity. And guess what? There's lots of studies. It's not hard to find scientific studies on that are demonstrating that schizophrenia is neurotoxicity in the brain. You can find reams of scientific studies on it. So I guess it would be helpful maybe now for folks who don't really know what schizophrenia is, permit me to give just like the briefest of explanation. And also I would say for people who do know a lot about schizophrenia, well, and who don't, for everyone listening, forgive me for speaking just mainly from my own experience. I do not speak with any real authority about this condition generally. I don't claim to speak for folks with schizophrenia. This is just what I've learned from mental health providers that we have had and from my own research over the last several years, particularly in the last 5 or so, to try to understand my child. So schizophrenia is a chronic disorder, and it has a really wide variety of symptoms, but there are some that are like pretty distinct and pretty unique in human experience. And what I mean by that is like most of us don't go through the world with these symptoms, and we don't even confront, we don't come in contact with many people with these kinds of symptoms, so they can be pretty arresting. So some of these unique symptoms would include like hallucinations and delusion and paranoia. So when people think of schizophrenia, they often think about folks having some kind of abnormal way of expressing themselves, like either really unusual ideas or like patterns of speech or, real quick or real slow speech cadence, just very unusual ways of engaging with people in the world. And I don't think we've been helped by Hollywood depictions of neurodiversity in this way, like, you know, neurodiversity in general, but schizophrenia in particular. Movies, TV, they're like really bad for instilling some awful stereotypes about what a person with schizophrenia acts like and sounds like. They're often depicted as like weird, even violent or criminal, like very Donnie Darko type predictions, right? Or depictions, I should say. But where's I going with that? Well, anyway, generally, I guess what I want to say is people with schizophrenia struggle very often with what we might call just very disorganized thinking patterns. Generally, that's what, mental health professionals will see. Unless, unless that individual also has a particular form of autism, in which case it may not be that their thinking is disorganized. It's just really inflexible, or there's certain really specific deficits. Like they have a very narrow niche where their thinking patterns are very irregular from the norm, and it's like really difficult for them to shift. But a lot of the other thinking patterns are like pretty acceptable in the world, like, oh, they're very creative, or oh, they're very focused, or oh, they're, that sort of thing. In neurodiversity lingo, we might say, oh, they have a spiky profile. They have some characteristics that are really pronounced and some not so much, right? So if you have both those things, and it's true that people with schizophrenia, there's a high correlation with autism as well. And so there you might have some characteristics of schizophrenia that are really strong, and then other characteristics that are weak. And then they'll overlap with some characteristics of autism that are really pronounced, with other characters not so much. So you can see how this is difficult to parse, especially when people are young. But an example would be like, okay, so for instance, this person might believe that a made up person or character or an alternate reality they've created out of their imagination is real. And like technically, they know they aren't real, or they sort of mostly know they aren't, but they can't stop themselves from acting as though the made up person is real. So here's a more concrete example. Let's say I have a big argument with Ruben, my husband, and we go through the big drama of like yelling. Lately, it's like yelling, and God, you guys, I'm going to do a future episode on my flight response. It's been fucking nuts. When you have a repressed flight response, you will go into fight, right? Very often, or freeze. But I have been so heightened lately that like my arms and legs literally are just like involuntarily doing things like, in movies, you see somebody like clear a whole counter with a sweep of their arm. I did that. I'm still vacuuming up coffee grounds from the compost bag. I slammed a door so hard that the screen door inside came off its metal hinge. I've lost my mind. I'm the lunatic. Anyway, so, okay, big drama, yelling, storming around, hours of dialogue. And then, tears, finally repair and sweetness. But then, for the next couple of days, we still have echoes of that conflict. Maybe we're kind of like bruised and wounded. So maybe we're like quieter for the next few days, maybe a little melancholy, maybe a bit clingy. Maybe we need a lot of reassurance. And then we go about our normal lives again. And then, like a few weeks later, next time, we might have a mild disagreement, but maybe we get rigid then. Our bodies go into a bit of activation, a little bit of fight or flight response, and it's like kind of all flooding back to us. And then we have this moment there, right? Do we just have it flood us and we escalate again, or do we like reach for some co-regulation? So I just took you through that whole journey. Perhaps you experienced like fluctuations in your own body, or you remember your own experience where it's like, okay, you're not having that huge dramatic fight now, but this tiny little rupture is starting to flood you and your body, and you're disorganized in that moment, right? Now, imagine if Reuben wasn't real. Imagine if Reuben was someone I'd made up, maybe a character in a novel I'm writing, but I'm acting like I'm depressed. I shouldn't say acting. I am depressed because Reuben and I just had a fight. And maybe I'm like calling my girlfriends and I'm asking the group chat for witnessing because I've got a lot of emotions to process. But Reuben doesn't exist in the material world. And so this whole time, I'm like really putting my body and my brain and my nervous system and my immune system and my energy levels through the ringer, right? And so, it's hard to draw the line between magical thinking and psychosis when it isn't like in the movies, if it isn't violent, but it's very concerning because there are real world somatic, psychological, and neurological impacts. And hey, you know what? Like, I long ago accepted that I have like an artist shaman as a child, and I'm okay with that. And I'm willing to like create the world in which they will thrive. But um, the scary part is that the magical thinking doesn't always start out as violent, but you just never know in a neurotoxic environment to the brain, just like you never know when like you're going to have a pain flare or an autoimmunity attack. You just never really know when things might turn dark, and it's hard if they do turn dark, it's impossible to know how far that will go and how fast. And so, like, how much does a caregiver worry about the nature of the beings that your hallucinating loved one is engaging with? It does seem to me that, like, sooner or later, there is going to be like conflict in the alternate reality, and that things then can turn malevolent pretty suddenly and for no apparent reason. It's not that different from life, right? There's just like unpredictable things that happen. Anyway, I want to be clear. I don't think I said this yet. Schizophrenia is treatable, okay? I want to be very clear about that. And like some people, with the help of very attuned and qualified psychiatric care and appropriate medication, whoop, that's my that's my take progesterone alarm. Okay, some people like they will benefit from medication and like social support and especially like a validating living environment, right? In that situation, they can like live independently, they can maybe be employed, they can maintain intimate relationships. That is totally possible. But for others, if the care network is lacking or there's a lack of like cultural acceptance, when I say culture, I mean like capitalism, um, or like if the living environment is invalidating, then it can become impossible to maintain employment because that exacerbates the mental health challenges and the physical health challenges, right? It's also, oh my God, it is very difficult to navigate the complexities of gaining access to social programs like income assistance. I was helping my kid go through this. It's like an 11-step process, and each step was like multiple appointments, tons of paperwork. It like, I don't know how people who didn't have a parent who totally accepts and is like totally engaged, I don't know how they do it. So, of course, then that becomes reinforcing of the negative symptoms, right? Symptoms are like nearly impossible to manage, and then they interfere with most aspects of those people's lives. And that leads to this like vicious cycle of breakdown and disability or, worse. So it is treatable, but I think it's also important to just not be Pollyanna about it, like just living in it. Like I say, 20 acres, horses, really validating environment, queer acceptance, all this kind of stuff. That doesn't make it go away. The neurotoxicity theory of schizophrenia proposes that like untreated psychosis can cause structural damage in the brain. Multiple studies have shown that individuals with schizophrenia experience gray matter volume reduction, and especially in the prefrontal lobe. So that the prefrontal lobe is like executive functions, things like emotional regulation, planning, reasoning, problem solving, and also the temporal lobes that are responsible for processing sensory information. So these parts losing gray matter, I mean, they're particularly important for like hearing and recognizing language and forming memories. So, like, basically, gray matter allows for functions like movement control, emotions, sensory perception. It's also where the majority of neuron cell bodies are. And it enables neurons to communicate with each other and like other parts of the nervous system. So gray matter is like really important for cultivating the capacity for like self-regulation and co-regulation. So a reduction of gray matter in the brain, it's often linked to conditions like Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. There's a huge study, anyway, probably not important, but the point is it can lead to various cognitive impairments, motor impairments. So again, like memory loss, difficulty with language and attention, decision making. Losing gray matter contributes to like mood and personality changes. This is what they think causes the hallucinations. There's also, in the neurotoxicity theory, they see white matter changes as well. And so it like breaks down the integrity of the white matter and like the what's that sheath called? Myelinated sheath around. Anyway, too technical. But the point is, I think of white matter as what enables the brain and body to connect dots when it comes to sending information from the body to the brain, vice versa, and like making sense of that. So, for instance, it's pretty easy to see like young kids don't have a lot of white matter until they have like a couple of really important growth spurts in adolescence when they have like a real proliferation of white matter. So until that they've had that, they don't have what they need to enable what we call precursive thinking. Precursive thinking is like if this, then that. It's the ability to have make abstract leaps, like thinking ahead in time and like other high level cognitive processes. So, it's like the part of your mind that can rationalize, okay, if I want to do this, I have to do that. If I want to wear my favorite jeans on Friday night and I want them to be clean and dry, I have to get them in the washing machine before supper time on Friday night, right? Maybe I should get them in the washer on Thursday so they have time to hang dry, but I have to take them out of the washer in order for them to dry, okay? We need white matter to be able to make these leaps. So untreated psychosis is associated with a reduction in these important parts of the brain. There's studies that show it's associated with like increased levels of certain fatty acids, which potentially affect perception of pain and also fear perception. So again, like the physical pain flares and the acute fear and panic and anxiety and paranoia. Studies also suggest that psychosis is linked to a decrease in like neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. So neuroplasticity, being able to grow neural pathways between neurons, and neurogenesis is like the ability to grow new neurons, new brain cells. And studies show that this neurotoxicity creates like an increase in nervous system related illnesses. So like autoimmune attacks. So, even if, let's say you, dear listener, are a scientist who is, skeptical about neurotoxicity theory, skeptical about like brain inflammation stuff, there's even like other studies that show that schizophrenia is just like bad for your health, right? So, yeah, I was thinking of this earlier. Like, there was a huge meta analysis of like half a dozen studies with over like 5 million participants, and they showed a significant positive relationship between schizophrenia and the risk of dementia. Other health problems, well studied, is there's commonly an increase in cardiovascular events, um, diabetes, liver disease. But I think, okay, I of course, I don't know what it's like to experience psychosis myself. But I think the main thing as a caregiver about psychosis that's really scary is, um, what if I lose them? Like, what if my child becomes utterly unreachable? Anyway, to be clear, again, want to reiterate, schizophrenia is treatable. It can be managed. And you best believe that we are always tweaking and finding ways to manage everything from pharmaceuticals to plant medicine to nutrition to nature to physio stuff. We've got it all covered, friends. So, no need for suggestions. We are on it. I appreciate your love. The best thing you could do is like pray. Pray for my child. And on good days, I am confident that, of all the young people afflicted with this kind of challenge, I think my child is the luckiest. Um, Mainly because, I have been working for a long time to unhook myself from capitalism and ableism, which goes hand in hand. And, these are things that compound the pain of mental health challenges, right? So, aside from like activities of daily living and learning how to drive a car, I think those are going to be life skills very important to have living rurally. Other than that, there's no real pressure on my child, um, that could like exacerbate their problems. There's no pressure on my child to conform from me. I'm not speaking for his dad's side of the family, um, but to conform to capitalism. And the thing is, I am always quick to come to his aid and come to his defense when he is feeling pressured or undermined or invalidated from other parties. Anywho, deep breath. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because this is collapse, friends. I'm in collapse personally. My beloved people are in collapse, um, because of mental or physical health, because of illness, because for other people it's bereavement or financial precarity, it's unresolved trauma. And, the tiny dramas of my life are relatively small compared to the epic human tragedies like the genocides in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, the environmental devastation that's destabilizing every part of the earth. I've worked with more clients in the past year directly impacted by climate disaster than like in all my career. And of course, all of this is happening against the backdrop of like America devolving under fascism, and beyond that, it's actually, I just saw this, one of the think tanks, more progressive think tanks, just posted something saying it's estimated 70% of the globe is now living under right wing rule to various extremes. So, like, collective collapse also very much happening, and people actually much more aware of it now than they were even 5 years ago. There are far fewer people in denial now than when I was first talking about it a decade ago. And even 5 years ago, people wouldn't really use the term collapse. But people are being more reasonable now. And as you know, like I've written a whole book about navigating collapse, Spells for the Apocalypse. It's literally a handbook for times just like these. Um, and there are more people that, like, let's say, that are coming into the Numinous Network who are like, yes, I am here for the spells. I am amazed. I am blown away how many people, like, so we've been doing the rituals and remedies from Spells for the Apocalypse, twice a month in the network. And I must say, they've been like oxygen for me. And I'm like stunned they're like the most well-attended events, and they're at like with such random times. Like I'm just kind of slotting them into the program whenever I can do them, and it'll be like Wednesday, 11 o'clock, and like dozens of people are there. It's wild. Uh, People want it, people need it, people get it. We've worked with rituals for despair and disquiet. We've done confusion and balance and rage and renewal. This last month in April, we worked with the energy of celebration because we just celebrated the fourth anniversary of the Numinous Network. So, I'm in collapse, but one way I'm making sure I don't allow myself to spiral into doom and dismay is that's just one small thing. Like I'm acknowledging my wins and I'm celebrating them in community. Like I'm taking my own advice, friends, right from the book. I'm acknowledging the reality of like where I'm at, what I'm experiencing, that this is collapse personally and collectively. And so, just as I would discuss with my clients, I am in discussion with myself. I've been like, okay, Carmen, you're in the blast zone of this shit show. And so you really only have two options to survive. You can either like reduce the demands on your system, or you can increase the inputs and resources that you access. And, I can do a little bit of reducing demands. Like I've scaled back my one-to-one work and I've shelved some ideas I had for writing projects. I decided to stop sending out a monthly newsletter this year. Instead, I'm just making this fun little zine. Comes out just 4 times a year, solstices and equinoxes. Make sure you're on my newsletter list. I'm not I'm putting no pressure on myself to publish podcast episodes. Making sure I'm not worried like, oh, am I going to get 24 out in 2025? I don't know. I don't know. I'm also holding like really solid boundaries around my time and my energy outputs. But I also I'm like really good at like trimming and boundarying myself, but I also need to remember to increase the amount of resourcing that I'm allowing to be poured into me. And those resources can be like physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. So that is a framework that I use for myself. I use for clients all the time when they're like, what should I do about this or that? I'm like, well, there's going to be 4 dimensions that you can attend to this problem on, right? There are going to be some things you can do that are physical, some are emotional, some are mental, some are spiritual. And all 4 levels really ideally are getting some contact nutrition, are getting some tending. So like physical resourcing would mean like asking my husband to pick up more cooking and grocery shopping again. Every once in a while, this kind of happens in our relationship where we slip into this super gendered domestic roles where the apparent assumption is like, okay, he's doing so much heavy labor around the farm and working like long days that I become the default organizer, shopper, menu planner, and like executor of our nutritional sustenance. And that's just like not something I can do all on my own right now. It's just too much cognitive load and like the brain fog. And then I end up like not eating enough protein all day. And then I'm like almost fainting in the evenings. So I have a post-it titled physical. And I just had to write down, ask Ruben to feed me. I also put therapeutic tremor. I need to prioritize my therapeutic tremor practice. I freaking trained in this thing that I know works and I guide people through it twice a week. I need to do it because I'm so emotionally like thin and raw right now that I have less than zero tolerance for patriarchy. And like since we're co-located with my in-laws and they are of a generation much more governed by patriarchy and like I'm quite triggered by it. I have to hold my hot potato like a lot. Um, and that's a complex situation. I wouldn't normally do that, but there are mitigating circumstances. I don't want to cause more trouble for my mother-in-law. So anyway, I need to remember to like discharge all that stress in quick and efficient ways. So like having a therapeutic tremoring practice means I can shake it out in 5 to 10 minutes. No muss, no fuss, no sweat. Literally no sweat. It's so much faster and more efficient than going for a run. And importantly, nobody gets hurt. And I'm not sweeping the compost bag off the counter. So therapeutic tremoring, if you don't know what that is, that's something we offer like 6 days a week, I think. 5 for sure, and then like every other weekend in the Numinous Network. Then there's a post-it titled emotional. And like I need to follow through on making those appointments with my therapist and our couples therapist, not because there's like so much wrong in our relationship or that there's so much conflict between me and Ruben, aside from anomalous things. It's more just, we were just saying today, we had couples therapy today, and we were saying to our therapist, we love coming to couples therapy because it's like renewing our vows because she's there sitting there on Zoom, like looking at us and we're looking at each other holding hands and just like sharing and communicating and witnessing. And ultimately, it just feels like a renewal of our vows every time. So I got to make sure that I know that I'm booking that because that's for me. And like experiencing multiple intensified dimensions of collapse, not just me, but also Ruben. I haven't even talked about what Ruben's got on his plate right now. It just puts an additional strain on each of us and also on our marriage. So, and then my own individual therapy, because I just like really needed my mentor to like coo at my amygdala and tell me that I matter and my feelings matter, my grief matters, my discombobulation is really valid and important and real, and I can have as much time as I need, and that like, yeah, because I'm feeling like an orphan. And I know as an attachment practitioner that like being estranged from my mother, grieving her sister, my Auntie Deb, it's just a very complicated attachment situation. Since, somewhere out there, my mom is profoundly grieving Deb as well. So I know it's like a really deep reactivation of like my early abandonment trauma and my adult attachment trauma and all that stuff. So I need to hear these things from a calm, soothing, matriarchal voice. I need someone to coo at my amygdala same way that I coo at my client's amygdala. And like we all need to be tucked into a little cocoon of care sometimes. And as a responsible adult, we've got to find a way to resolve our emotional material. We have to find the way to overcome the pain of our prior interrupted reach. And we have to be tenacious and try to find someone safe enough to practice extending ourselves towards that contact nutrition that we crave. We have to practice reaching out, even though it hasn't gone so great in the past. We actually just can't give up on that. So I'm also making time on Fridays to have a phone call with a friend, like, a walk and talk on the phone, or like a Zoom call, or a voice note ping pong if necessary, because I need more contact nutrition. Remember, contact nutrition is made up of kind eyes, vocal prosody, safe touch, shared rhythm, and ingestion behaviors. If contact nutrition is a new concept for you, just very in brief, these are the building blocks of secure attachment. It's the how-to of secure attachment. Because secure attachment is so much more than communication. And in some ways, it's so much simpler than talking and communication. And if you want to learn more about contact nutrition, again, you join the Numinous Network, you take my course, Contact Nutrition 101. Everybody in the network will like bring you up to speed as well. But for now, you could just ask yourself, like, what sounds like it resonates with what you need while you're navigating collapse? What helps you stabilize yourself? Is it maybe feeling seen and getting gotten and feeling seen through kind and loving eyes? Or do you crave, well, it's not either or. You can have all the kinds of contact nutrition, but some people have a distinct preference. So maybe you would prefer the soothing resonance of a compassionate voice telling you really gently that your distress makes so much sense and you're not alone. Or maybe you would prefer the steadying touch of like a really thorough, strong hug, or a massage therapist with really gentle magic hands. Or maybe safe touch for you is like wearing your softest and most favorite hoodie and sweatpants for days and days in a row. Or like me, it's flannel pajamas in like the afternoon. Or maybe you want the shared rhythm of like weekend walks with a friend, or visiting your favorite tree sit spot in the evenings, or you're looking for signs of spring, the forsythia heralding brighter days ahead, or the rhythm of like listening to your power songs over and over on your commute to and from work. Maybe it's like a standing date with a friend where you get to support them and you're not always feeling like you're the one who's doing shitty, you know? Maybe you want to contribute that shared rhythm of like mirroring and witnessing them, so that you feel, yeah, like you've made meaningful contribution. You might not have been able to have a shower for a couple of weeks or get your taxes filed on time, but being present with someone else is fulfilling that sense of like a shared meaningful experience. Or maybe ingestion behaviors, like maybe you're craving something comforting, like you want morning cup of tea in peace and quiet now outside on the porch because it's spring. Or even just like, maybe you should plan a coffee or meal together with your beloved or a group of pals. Maybe the ingestion behavior is just breathing, like you're craving deeper breaths. You're a bit air hungry. Maybe you want to consider taking a breathwork workshop or investing in a special essential oil or aromatherapy like diffuser or something that helps you remember to breathe a bit more deeply. So contact nutrition helps us land a sense of safeness within ourselves and within the world. And when safeness is hard to come by, it's extra important to like go back to basics, okay? It's kind eyes, vocal prosody, which is emotional resonance in the voice, safe touch, shared rhythm, ingestion behaviors, which is eating and drinking. So contact nutrition is to secure attachment as vitamins are to a healthy diet. Everyone needs a different mix. Not everyone craves or needs the same things, but nobody can survive totally bereft of them. And that's really what's on my post-it marked mental level. Scan for safeness and contact nutrition, because negativity bias is real, friends. Holy crap. When the news is shit and your life keeps serving up rotten lemons, it's hard to notice that good things are happening too. And I did this just the other day. I had asked the group chat for some witnessing, and I kind of preempted myself, being like, I'm so sorry. I don't want to be that friend that's like, God, she's always such a downer. It's always so serious. She's so draining. And one of my friends in the chat was like, what are you talking about? Like, you only have to scroll back like one swipe to see your last message, which was beautiful photos and videos of your recent trip to a place that we all hold very dear and is very meaningful to us all. And you like gave us a voice note with an update on all the people we know and love there and how they're doing. And it was such great news. And that was so nice and considerate of you. So, like, you bring joy too. But even if you didn't, we'd be here for you. And so that was a really good lesson for me, like my own negativity bias and my own like withdrawal when I'm not doing well. That only makes things worse. And frankly, I would never think that of my friend, you know? So I could be more of a friend to myself here by like taking up the challenge of scanning for safeness and comfort and little lifts and taking a moment to savor them and even share them with others. And yeah, so this is how we cultivate satisfiability and enoughness, which again is an essential collapse skill, being satisfiable. Again, I talk about all this in Spells for the Apocalypse, but one way I systematize this collapse skill of satisfiability is with my joy book. Now, the joy book process is like too much to explain here, and it's quite a bit more than just like a gratitude journal. It's the joy book is like the central concept and the central tool in my True Prosperity program, which is running live on Saturdays in the Numinous Network for the month of May. Come check it out. Can you tell I just program all the stuff that I need personally? It's like, this is why I think of the Numinous Network as like basically a healthcare co-op where we're all pooling resources so we can all get the healthcare and health and wellness support that we need at a reasonable price. So yes, I schedule everything that I personally want to need. Okay, finally, my last post-it is titled Spiritual Level. And that's where I do just need to remind myself, even I, powerful witch that I am, have to remember to tap into support from spirit more regularly. Now, I talk to the trees every day. I greet the sun and the moon, but the one thing that really makes me feel well resourced is my daily tarot card pull. And I'll give myself a break for missing it 1 or 2 days. I love quoting Erin Fairchild of Journal as Altar, who says, I have a daily journaling practice I don't do every day. Like, we don't get down on ourselves if we're not 100% consistent, right? But my daily routine has changed here a bit, and I have less private time and space now that we're living in the RV. And so I've fallen out of the habit for like probably 2 months now. And man, I feel it. Why is it so hard to remember? So now it's on my post-it daily card pull, right? It doesn't seem like I should have to have a post-it note for it, but I do. And this is where we are. So, in summary, I hope you're tracking with me here, friends. One of the ways that I'm dealing with collapse is literally post-its, where there's like 4 levels of things we can do when we are going through a personal collapse to address the allostatic load. Allostatic load means the cumulative psychological strain on the body. It's like the wear and tear of chronic stress, which ultimately leads to physiological distress and disease and mental corrosion and breakdown, relationship breakdown. So it's like physical level, emotional level, mental level, spiritual, right? Because personal collapse on top of collective collapse is going to increase our allostatic load. We have to like go back to basics, okay? And if I could, if I may, if we could just circle back to the mental level, I want to mention a couple of patterns that I see with people who are just kind of they're becoming newly aware of collapse. These are patterns I see people struggling with right now. One, it's like they're becoming newly aware of collapse, of the severity and precarity of our situation, societally, politically, economically, whatever. And they're overwhelmed trying to understand, like, why is it happening? And they're struggling to make meaning of it. So they're like searching for answers. They're looking for leadership. They're like reading books, they're researching, listening to podcasts. And like, again, I've been talking about collapse publicly for over a decade. I wrote a book basically summarizing it. If you look on the Numinous podcast or like in your podcast player, like numinouspodcast.com or in your podcast player, if you roll back to episode 222, you will see I've recorded over 50 podcasts directly about collapse, right? So I totally understand the desire to understand collapse. And I said it earlier, I get how grounded coherence feels. It feels so good. I completely empathize with that almost like frantic desire to coalesce into clear understanding. It feels great. It feels like safeness or maybe even a small measure of control. But I think that moment in the learning journey is a bit of a dangerous time. I think it's good to, if I can use this word again, disabuse folks of the notion that understanding collapse will somehow make it a bit easier. Maybe it does, but I don't know. In some ways, I think it's true that ignorance is bliss, especially when it comes to predicaments, which of course is what collapse is. I just think, I'm not saying that if you're late to the party, you might as well just like check out, but I'm just saying that you're not going to be able to catch up and figure everything out overnight. You know, it's just too big. Collapse is, just for a little repetition here, the converging emergencies of large scale cooperation dilemmas for which there are no solutions, only responses. Problems have solutions, but the complexities we face do not have solutions. Every supposed solution we could apply is, in fact, another layer of complexity. And all complex societies will eventually collapse under the strain of their own complexity. It's a vicious circle. So every solution causes more problems, at least for someone somewhere. So what we have here are predicaments, problems, no easy answer, and not problems that have answers, right? So what do we have? We have responses. We have responses. We can just release the need to know and understand every part of collapse and just move into small steps that feel like a mobilized response. Like, yes, feel free, listen to some podcasts, read some books. I highly recommend just like 5 to 10 minutes a night of, let's say, Timothy Snyder's very short, very digestible book on tyranny. It's an audiobook that's like 2.5 hours long. I find it very calming. It's like my bedtime listen. If I wake up in the middle of the night, I just like turn on 15 minutes of On Tyranny and I'm out like a light. But what I would say is like try to set some very clear limits on how much new information you take in right now. What we actually want to do at this point is remove some of the cognitive load if we can by simplifying our thought processes as much as we can just to accomplish those tasks. So we have to have a good vision of what we're moving towards, and then any small task is good enough. So I would stay more in like dream mode rather than research mode and discussion mode. So you want to focus on like small tasks that feel doable, visioning the alternative, reality that you want to have, the world that we're trying to build together, and then just like backcast from there. What's a small thing you can do that will help you stay mobilized and motivated to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So one of my tricks is I just use short credos to help me do this. In sales, we used to call it the phrase that pays. What is the phrase that pays? The catchy little phrase that helps you refocus your attention where you need it to be. So a few that are helping me to like signal to myself right now, like, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed. I need to narrow my focus. I'm starting a mental doom spiral. Like one phrase, because the land is so cluttered here, is green and clean. Green and clean. That's my focus. Or don't put it down, put it away. Don't put it down, put it away. Because the clutter in my home it's giving me a panic attack. Don't agonize, organize. Don't agonize. Don't keep scrolling, organize. Sign up. Take the call from the Green Party campaigner or the Lead Now, community organizer. Just don't agonize, organize. Another thing, when it's like interpersonal stuff is starting to suffer because I have so much brain overwhelm, teamwork makes the dream work. And even just like using phrases that orient to usness. Like I've been saying in my mind, when I'm like arguing with Ruben in my head, I'm just saying, we're an us. Or another thing we say is, only you and I, my love. Teamwork makes the dream work. So I want you to feel your seat and feel your feet, friends. If you're already like so overwhelmed by everything I'm sharing, because I haven't had a podcast in ages and now I'm like dumping too much, pause, have a little somatic reset, go somewhere else. But I'm going to just share a little bit more. And it could be a little panic inducing if you're someone who finds clutter overwhelming. Because part of my overwhelm is that I've moved to a large acreage that is just chock-a-block full with, we call them artifacts. If you've listened to the last episode with me and Ruben, I can't remember what episode it was, but Ruben shared very kindly and compassionately about the artifacts. And these artifacts have been degrading into the land, the physical soil, for like decades, poisoning it with plastics. And it's just an overwhelming level. It's a lot to take in and to need to contend with. And it's a very complex and very emotionally tender and fraught situation for everyone in the family, each of us for different reasons. And the scale of it is so fast. And even like talking about it plainly as a family is like the topic is just so impregnable, so untouchable, that kind of creates a lot of panic in me. So to reduce the cognitive load and the somatic load, I just have to use these little containment strategies so I don't let my mind escalate into overwhelm. So instead of being like, how are we ever going to get this place cleaned up? I say to myself, green and clean. We just keep aiming for green and clean. We're going to get the land cleared and irrigated. First things first. And I just say to myself, green and clean. And that's my cue. Not to bother trying to grasp the entire issue in all its complexity at once, not to have arguments with people in my mind. I just stay focused on what's in front of me and I deliver that square foot as closely as I can to green and clean. I put that one piece of degrading plastic in the garbage or recycling, green and clean, one piece at a time. Or I'll say to myself, like, don't put it down, put it away. Because there's multiple people with ADHD here. And so the land, here's the metaphor. Okay, here's the metaphor, my friends. Imagine a mind with extreme executive dysfunction, okay? And imagine that every idea, every dream, every special interest, every project idea, every idea was a physical object that you've ever had, okay? Every idea you've ever had is a physical object. And now scatter those objects all over across like acres and acres and acres. And now do that for 50 years. And now imagine, feel your feet in your seat. Now imagine that every single object has a prisoner chained to it. And every single object has its own bodyguard defending it. So you can't actually touch the thought object because that would require you to either somehow rescue the prisoner, who, by the way, doesn't want to be rescued because that's also scary. They've been here for 50 years. Or you'd have to take down the bodyguard, and their entire life and their identity, their entire sense of purpose is bound up in protecting this thought object. So, like, if they don't successfully protect this thought object and keep it in place, that would mean they'd not only failed, but ultimately that they'd squandered their entire life on a failing venture. And now, in addition to that landscape, do that same exercise again. Every thought you've ever had is a physical object. Do it for 50 years. Assign a prisoner and a bodyguard to each object. But instead of 40 acres, now you're going to contain all of those thought objects within your home. So just like replicate that same exercise, but instead of 40 acres, it's like 2,000 square feet. And so that's the situation, indoors and out. And now you are going to parachute into this scene, and you are going to live here for the rest of your days. Okay? I'm like laughing and crying. Okay. Dear listener, I'm sure you can feel inside yourself a bit of what that might be like. So, in order to respond to this predicament, I now narrow my focus. I contain the scope of my gaze and my thoughts and my ambition. I call my spirit back to me. I recenter. I say to myself, Carmen, don't put it down. Put it away. I do what I can do. I don't squander my energy where it will only be wasted trying to like cajole a prisoner who doesn't want to work with me, or, instigate something with a bodyguard who only wants to fight me. I don't put my tools down where I stop working. I put them in the tool shed. I don't keep up my winter coats on the rack where they've clearly, been lingering and we're into spring. I don't do that. I'm putting them in the storage shed. Just the little things that help me redirect a mental spiral into this, call it what you want, a tiny little win, a small act of self-preservation or resistance, a sense of being in my own dignity, a step towards the ultimate vision for my life and our lives here. Because what is the vision exactly? Let me share it with you, friends. Let me relieve you. Make sure you're still breathing, okay? Can you feel your belly? Oh, a little somatic reset. Where are your doors and windows? Like I said, I'm going to do an episode on the flight response. Orienting to doors and windows is like such a great somatic strategy when you feel panic and like you got to get out of here. But another thing is visioning. So I said earlier that I've like eliminated pressure on my child to conform to capitalism, because like capitalism basically jeopardizes his mental health. And since, as you know, I do not have intergenerational wealth, like in the form of cash in the bank. Like, what is my plan? What is my plan, you might ask? Well, here is where I owe a deep, profound debt of gratitude to my in-laws and also to my proximity to patriarchal power, basically my husband, because my in-laws purchased this land in like the 1960s, and so they were able to pay off the land a few years ago, the help of like some inheritance and just many years of hard work, and like aside from the 40 acres of artifacts, they didn't like squander their money, they paid off their mortgage. They didn't like drive new cars. They didn't go on vacations, So now their only son will inherit this land that is fully paid off. Huzzah! Thank you. Like very, very privileged. And, although there's like no infrastructure on this land that like none, not homes, not plumbing, not electricity, that isn't in dire need of like long overdue, well, completion or repair or renovation, like everything needs attention. Technically, though, we could just muddle through continuing to live as they have lived all these years, right? We could keep living in this RV all year round, and we could just be as satisfied with that, and it would be nowhere near what like a middle-class Canadian would consider a basic standard of living, but it would still be as good or better than most of the world's population, right? So in that sense, like my kids' future is already in as good a shape as most people's kids in the world. But of course, like we all want our kids to have a better life than we did, right? Or I don't know, like I don't know. Actually, it seems like a lot of boomers don't seem to want that, but I do. I do. So our plan has been to keep working on gradually removing all the artifacts from the land as we set about regenerating the soil and reintroducing livestock animals to create a more holistic agricultural ecosystem. Not for market sales or anything like that, just for subsistence. So, subsistence farming for us, for folks who come to live with us, and for our neighbors. This has been like Ruben's dream his whole life, or I don't know, for decades anyway, has been basically to be a peasant. I remain the economic engine, and he establishes his permaculture, regenerative agriculture. So now the land that we're on actually technically is two different plots, and they each have different zoning. They're the main road into this part of the country. There's just like one road going out, and it bisects the lot, and it's zoned differently. These two plots of land. So the agricultural land that we live on, that's actually zoned for 5 dwellings, and it already has 2 permanent dwellings. And then, someday when my in-laws pass away, Ruben and I will move into one of those houses. Our kid wants to be a little bit further away from the main house, which is actually a duplex. So like someone else, an individual or a couple, will live in the duplex attached to the main house. And we will build my kid a tiny house. And there's enough lumber on this land for a great deal of the raw materials. And we know friends with a portable mill, and Ruben is a good builder. So, we will scratch together a bunch of that. And we are very much planning for this. Like when I purchased a power pole for us to be able to have power and internet where we are currently located on the land, there wasn't power there. And it cost, you had to pay cash, and it was like a $40,000 cash investment. So all of our savings. But we purchased this power pole that is big enough to power 3 homes. So that is very much a thing we're going to do. And then the other plot of land is zoned for 4 more dwellings. But the actual habitable bit of the land is quite restricted because it's a sheer mountain face. So they would have to be very, very tiny homes, probably only big enough for like individuals or perhaps seasonal workers, maybe if there's a couple. But it's not likely a pleasant long-term living situation. But regardless, all of that, those 9 dwelling units, is how we will get help to create community, to manage the farm and develop systems. And like hopefully over time, we will identify a succession plan for someone to essentially take over the farm, because that's not something our child is going to be able to do. but they would take over the farm. They'd inherit the farm in exchange for our child always having a place to live and food to eat until they die. And then after that, either the land is like, inherited by the person who's been managing it, or maybe it goes back to the local First Nations. Who knows? But the vision is that this land will be a sanctuary for other queer neurodivergent folks. Hopefully some are very abled and physically active and strong because it is a farm, and hopefully some are really great systems thinkers. Hopefully everyone is really creative and artistic and animistic. In our visions and discussions of these very like-hearted souls, we call them the they-thems. And so we'll say, well, when the they-thems get here, they'll probably need like a gathering space for meetings and their intuitive dance and their music jams and their Gallic folk singing nights and stuff. And they'll want a place where I'll want a place where I can be an old lady with silver hair, like leading family constellations and systemic constellations, because I bet the they-thems would really love that modality if they don't already know of it. Anyway, and so here's the basic deal that we are hoping to come to with our they-them kin. The they-thems would like come here and work for a few seasons, and if we all like each other after a couple years or whatever, and they want to stay, they develop some competency, they can develop a spin-off business using the farmland and infrastructure, meaning they could use the land and whatever they can produce to earn money. And then there's 3 agreements that come with that. So like they create a business that they run and manage and they earn their money from. But the 3 agreements are this. Number 1, they market their goods under our brand. So Falder Farm on Syilx territory. Number 2, they return 10% of their gross revenue to us. Not profit, revenue. So they have to be good with their own money, but they return 10% to us of their gross. And then 3, when they leave, they take only their experience. So we will purchase and maintain infrastructure and assets, and they get to run their own business. And as long as they stay, they get to keep 90% of their revenue. And they don't really have to invest. But if they decide that they don't like it and they leave, they don't get to take it with them. So here, we have discussed this quite a bit, and I would like to share with you the farm spin-off businesses. These are our ideas already, okay? I'm very excited about these. They're kind of in order of like things people could start tomorrow to things that might take a couple years for us to be able to do. So eggs, could start that any day now. Chickens, meat chickens. Garlic, we already have a small garlic operation going. That's how we keep our farm status. Along with, we have 2 acres of cherry orchard, which we're hoping to convert into a mixed fruit and nut orchard. It's estimated, in a bad year, that could be like 15,000 in revenue. Anyway, not to get too detailed, but orchard, somebody wants to be an orchardist. Honey and wax, nursery and like plant or seedling sales, and like including a xeriscape, drought tolerant plant nursery. Willow and weaving, we have a creek that abuts half of our property, so willow could do really well. Then like bigger, non-GMO seed saving. I think a seed saving business would be really good. Bigger kind of infrastructure stuff that might take a while. Beef, could do some cattle. A small amount, not a big. Flowers with potentially workshops or sales. There'd be some infrastructure needed for like cooling and if you were designing stuff. Anyway, pigs, hogs. Grains and cereal production, that would be extremely small, extremely niche, but could happen for sure. There's like a few acres here. Somebody who wanted a very small business could just do the honor stand because the Trans-Canada Trail runs right across our driveway, so could be a good place for the honor stand. Straw bale building, we actually need a number of buildings made, so if somebody knows how to build straw bale buildings and wants to come and make it on our farm as their workshops, sweet. trail rides, because we're getting our horse track system set up this fall. So could have a small herd of horses here. If there was a hide tanner, I happen to know some. But when if we get stuff set up, there could be opportunity for animal hides and harvesting those hides as well as tanning workshops here. I also think like a youth apprenticeship or like outdoor school or like a hybrid friend school, homeschooling, farm school thing, if somebody did early childhood education. Along with that would be like spring break summer camps. There's a lot of safety issues right now because of all the artifacts. So we'd have to do quite a bit. And like eventually, if somebody did want to work farmers markets and CSA, like we have acreage for that, right? We more, fruit, more vegetable acreage than we could ever possibly need for the people who could live here. And potentially, this is my crazy idea, because we have that like a mountain, like kind of a sheer mountain face as the other zoning. What about like a rock climbing school? I mean, I don't know, because it's zoned for recreation. So Ruben also adds like rabbits and sheep, perhaps even a tenting campground, especially when we get the large pond set up. That could be quite pretty. And potentially even if somebody wanted to do more like hospitality, like a old school bed and breakfast. So lots of ideas here, friends. That's the vision we're holding. And that's what I am holding with every piece of garbage and artifact and refuse I clean up, every square foot I remediate. I just remind myself, this is the world I am building, a queer sanctuary for they, thems, including my own child, where they can live a life of relative safety, of low sensory input that is more or less comforting and familiar and consistent, that is creative and attuned to natural rhythms, and that supports diversity in all living things. So that's how I'm coping, friends, is having that vision and like standing in the future, calling the present to me, And some days it's really, really hard and overwhelming, but it helps when I simplify it down to like 4 Post-its and a phrase that pays, and training myself every day to scan for safeness and savor the little lifts. And it also helps to share it. So I hope that any part of you that feels alone or overwhelmed feels a little less so, knowing that it hits me hard too sometimes. And I also hope that some of the psychoeducation in today's episode will be useful, or at the very least, an interesting diversion for you. And I hope that the world I'm trying to build inspires you to recognize how you're showing up in world-building ways, and how you're standing in the future, and how you're dreaming about collective liberation and a life beyond fascism and capitalism and patriarchy and ableism and white supremacy, and infusing that into your everyday. So thank you so much for listening, friends. I know it's a long one, but I haven't reported in for a while, so forgive me. I guess last thing would be just remember, as I said, every Saturday in May, I'm offering a new and improved update of my True Prosperity program. I'm calling it a refresh. And this is the program that I developed to help me get over my money anxiety after my bankruptcy in 2009. So another form of collapse. And those live sessions are every Saturday this month, but it will be recorded and archived. So all you have to do is become a member of the Numinous Network to access that, or join us live on Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. Pacific. Learn more about the network at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.